Hi.
Hey, Micah.
Hi, Shannon. How are you today?
Doing well on a Thursday.
On a Thursday. I'm so glad that we are able to get together and chat a little bit. We've both been having some clients kind of thinking about the same thing, right? This idea that they've been in the workplace for 5, 8 years. They've been in hustle mode, pushing through to the next right role for them. And then they get there and they have to start doing what? Really thinking about building a career versus just diving in and reacting and taking whatever comes their way. But that really 8-year mark after working, sometimes 10, depends on the person. It really is the point where you start building the career that you want, the career that you're thinking about. This has been coming up a lot, right?
Yeah, and so I think the topic that we're covering today is this idea of how do you shift out of hustle mode early in your career to start actually intentionally building your career path, and how to recognize when you're in that hustle mode and when it's time to start shifting into building that intentional path, maybe some indicators of that, what we've seen, what we're hearing from clients, and then like, how do you actually do that?
It's not easy, but it certainly is attainable. So let's dive in.
Why is it important, I guess?
What's that?
Why is it important?
Well, I mean, I think we've also had the other types of clients that come to us when they're 35, 40. They have been working really hard. They've been hustling and trying to achieve in the role that they set out on. And within that time, they aren't necessarily paying attention to whether they're feeling fulfilled. So by the time they're 35 or 40, they're exhausted, and maybe their career path doesn't really align with who they are or what their strengths are. And they feel pretty burnout and often frustrated or full of resentment.
Yeah, I absolutely. And we see this over and over again. And I think one of the things, this is maybe not true for every person, but I do think that often when we sit down and talk with these folks, that they had indicators earlier in their career that maybe it wasn't right, or something felt off, or they felt a little directionless, or their career, I hear this a lot, like their career was like happening to them, right? Which is not always a bad thing, right? They get promotions or they're getting opportunities and they're just kind of following what's coming, versus actually at some point choosing, this is the direction I want to head in.
Yeah. Another indicator of that I do hear from clients sometimes is, I've been working so hard to get here and I'm here, and now I'm looking at my boss and I don't want any of that. What my boss is doing or what their boss is doing, that's actually not the lifestyle. That's actually not the type of work I want to be doing or the environment I want to be in. And that feels very alarming.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's so true. And I think the reason why we wanted to chat about this today is that, the beginning of a career often does look a lot like hustle mode, right? Saying yes to a lot of different opportunities, taking what's coming, being open to experimenting and trying things on, and, kind of being the person that people go to do a lot. And that's okay, right? It's a way to get in there and see what you like and what you don't like, where you're naturally gifted or where your strengths lie, and build networks and all of that. So it's okay, I think, at that beginning stage. It's just what we are hoping to kind of encourage is like, how can you start to pay attention when you feel like maybe you're outgrowing that, or it's starting to feel less satisfying? And rather than waiting until, 35, 40, 50 to take a look at this and start asking some questions, maybe you can be paying attention and make that shift on your own before then.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we would hope for everyone, right? To really have tools to stop and say, okay, I'm in this, it's busy, I'm moving forward, but how can I reflect? How can I see if this is the path that I've chosen versus the one that's chosen me?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you and I both have a handful of clients who fall into this category. And, have an inkling, have like a uneasy feeling, or there's an itch or something that they can't quite put their finger on, and they, start to explore and start to dig in. And really the outcome isn't always that they're in the wrong place or that they have to make a 180, change.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it's just about starting to dig in to understand yourself and your strengths and where your natural, talents lie. And it can be really small shifts that you can be making, but it's the difference of like having your career happen to you to shifting into that driver's seat. And all of a sudden you starting to build and create the career you want.
Yep. So if we're a 28-year-old and we are, feeling some of these inklings of something might be off, what are the first steps that we could start doing?
Yeah. Well, so I think we just kind of did the first one, which is, I think, just normalizing that as like a natural career development portal or point in the timeline, right? That like to be paying attention to, okay, I'm about to turn 30, or I've been in the workforce for, 5 to 7 years. And to recognize like, okay, this is a good time to start doing some investigating. So I first just want to like normalize that. Oftentimes people think like something's wrong, or this is a big problem. And it's more so like, no, it's okay. This is a normal piece in a career timeline.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the next step after that is actually committing to figuring it out.
Yep.
I have a client currently who's like, I've been thinking about this for 8 years. And
Oh.
I know that because I, had this thing happen in my life. That was the beginning of it. It's been 8 years. And so I need to figure this out. This isn't something that's going away. So normalizing that there's a point where you need to start paying attention, and then committing to figuring it out is another kind of psychological challenge, I think, because otherwise it's always there. It's just like she said, my client, it didn't go away.
Yeah. So what does it take, or how could someone, maybe we could talk a little bit about what do you think prevents people from committing to explore this, or, starting to look into that uneasiness or that itchy feeling?
Well, it is an uneasy feeling, and
Yeah.
humans will do anything to avoid discomfort. So we know that. And also it takes concentration. It's busy in our lives. It's very easy to put this on the back burner. So, I do hear that like, oh, this came up, or then I got promoted here. So that commitment really has to be about something you're fostering within yourself that you believe is attached to a better path. Right. So if I commit to this, if I think of ways to figure this out, it's because it's going to make my life better. It's because it's going to make my future better, or it's because I really need to have an answer. And so I've got to commit to figuring that out.
Yeah. And this is so good, because I think this gets down to kind of that human nature thing, right? Like we are wired to go down the path of least resistance. Right. And so even if we are feeling uneasy or itchy, it's easier to stay put and just put our head down and stay hustling and not ask the questions, not disrupt the cycle. And it takes effort and time and commitment and all of that. And I always say like bravery, because it can be scary to open this Pandora's box. You don't know what's going to come out. You don't know what it's going to involve. So it takes more effort. But I think this is the difference between like short-term ease and comfort versus long-term satisfaction, fulfillment, feeling proud and, content in terms of where you're at in your life. And I think you and I are in an interesting vantage point that we see both ends of those spectrums. Right. We see the 28-year-old who's starting to feel that itchiness and starting to ask those questions. And then we also see the 35, 40, 50-year-old who felt it and never dug in and investigated, and what was lost because of that.
Yeah. The older you get, the less tolerable it is. And I think that's also something that's pretty easy to brush aside when you're young. Oh, I can deal with this. This isn't important enough for me to do that investigation that feels uncomfortable. So we're here to tell you it is. It's very important.
And I think one other thing, not to be, the Debbie Downer, but yeah, it's harder. And it also, oftentimes you have more responsibilities, right? Maybe you have a family, you have a home, your lifestyle is at a certain income level. And so the idea of making shifts or changes gets so much scarier and harder the further along down that path you are.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. That's hard because the shift is less flexible at that point. So if you are
not impossible though, we have lots of people who've done it and whatnot, but
100%.
just trying to be honest about that. So, okay, go ahead.
And it is also, if you think about it, not to be a Debbie Downer, but between 28 and 50, those are a lot of years to feel discontent as well. So it's less easier when you're older, still attainable, but also you've lived through a lot of years of maybe not feeling fulfilled in your career. So if you are in that position where you're 5, 8, 10 years into the career, you're feeling like the hustle has gotten you somewhere, and now you're thinking about, do I want to stay? Do I want to shift? Where do I go? How do you start that investigation?
Yeah. So, our work is all about, starting to dig in to understand your strengths, right? So this idea of, going in and exploring what drives me, what motivates me, what energizes me, where's my greatest opportunities for potential, and starting to ask those questions. We utilize an assessment called the Clifton Strengths Assessment, but I think you can do this in a lot of different ways. But first step always is to, start asking some questions.
And journaling is a great space for that. Keeping some kind of, journal about how work went, what you found energizing in your day, what you did not find energizing in your day. That type of swimming in self-reflection is excellent. Sometimes it's more helpful for someone to talk things through. Obviously, you can reach out to a career coach, and you could reach out to Shannon and I. But also, if you do have a friend in your life who is also really, interested in building a brighter future for themselves, sometimes those are great people to kick around the things that you're thinking about, the things you're considering, and the answers you're trying to find.
Yeah. And that's such a simple step, right? That idea, you talk about this a lot, of like, just really keeping track of, like, at the end of the day, 2 or 3 things that energize me today, or the 2 or 3 things that really brought me into the dumpster, right? Or that really, depleted my energy or frustrated me. And if you keep that journal, right, that could take 5 minutes at the end of your day for, 2 or 3 weeks, you're going to start to see some patterns emerging, and you're going to start to see, what parts of your day and what percentage of your day are you doing things that energize you, satisfy you, that make you feel confident and impactful, versus the amount of time that you are doing stuff that feels frustrating, depleting, or you just, are completely disengaged from.
Yeah. And if there's a lot of the latter, then what are the next steps? If you keep that journal for 2 weeks and you're like, wow, I really am not liking my job on a lot of levels, right?
Yeah.
And it seems like I don't have a good day any day. There are no tasks that are giving me any energy, which, by the way, is a recipe for burnout. Which is, a real medical condition. We know people get stressed, they lose sleep, they develop bad habits, they lose a sense of self. All of those things come from not being fulfilled during your day. So if that's what you find, some of the next steps could be.
Yeah. And I want to talk about next steps, but you said something earlier that I also want to use as a marker, which is this idea of, like, maybe you're feeling just fine, right? Content, satisfied, equal, or, you get to do a lot of stuff you like, but taking a look at the paths in front of you, right? Your boss, your manager, their boss, their manager.
Yep.
right? And looking to kind of get a sense of like, am I heading in a direction that excites me, that aligns with things I want to learn and grow, and puts me in a role that, you know, I continue to do what I do best, is also another. So like taking inventory of your days, but then also looking at, am I excited for what's coming next? And, you know, this requires you to get out of that hustle mode with your head down and just grinding to
Mhm.
really start to pay attention to like, am I working so hard to go somewhere that I actually want to be?
I've had a lot of clients in that scenario recently where they looked at the boss's hours, they looked at the boss's responsibilities, they looked at the boss's salary for all those hours and all of those responsibilities. And often it's like industry standards, right? So they're like, oh, within my industry, this is what the standard is. And I actually don't want that.
Mhm.
I actually don't think that that future is going to really fulfill me or, engage me in the lifestyle I want.
Mhm.
And so when I have had clients like that recently, it's also very hard. And I want to normalize this to have to make a real pivot. If
Yeah.
that is where you end up, that having to make a real pivot out of something that you thought you wanted can sometimes be very emotionally challenging for folks.
Yeah.
But it happens a lot because when we're young and we start out, we often take the job we can get, or we often study the thing that we have an interest in that doesn't go beyond a hobby, maybe.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of guidance in our country from,
No.
high school to college and college to the workforce. So just want to normalize, people do get to this point and it is a full-on pivot.
Yeah. And I think too, it's shifting so much, but I think there's still remnants of this old idea of a linear career path, right? You get on a path, you know, in your 20s and you stay on that path, right? And maybe you shift companies a little bit or you shift around in your industry a little bit, but like you are on your path. And I think one, that's just really not the case for the majority of people in the workforce these days. And two, I think, starting to begin to look up and around to the people who have successfully pivoted can be really energizing if you are feeling what you're talking about, Micah, where maybe your sense of identity is being questioned, maybe that sunk cost fallacy of like, feeling I've spent all this time and investment in education and, all these things, I can't make a change now. Being able to look up and out to like who's made successful pivots and what did they gain by being brave enough to explore what else was out there that might be a better fit. And I guarantee you'll find stories that will inspire you, empower you, and maybe motivate you to do the work to get to a place that feels, more exciting, satisfying, fulfilling.
Yeah. And those stories are everywhere. There's been a lot of posts lately that have come up in my feed where people say like, I got my doctorate at 47. I got my favorite job at 50.
Yep.
And
Yep.
obviously those are kind of light little interactions, but if you start really kind of searching this topic out, you'll read incredible stories. And I think it's so important to just swim in that for a while and surround yourself in those stories because they really can build a lot of courage within you.
Yeah. What if we stopped here today and we do a part 2 next week? And next week we'll go into, okay, you've been feeling the itch, you start to investigate, maybe it's become clear you're not where you want to be, it's not a good fit anymore, then what? And we can talk about the then what next time.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea.
Okay. Nice chatting with you.
Nice seeing you as always.
Bye-bye.
Bye.